Welcome to episode number 36 of the American Regulars podcast. I'm your host, JD Walter, and we are less than a week away from the presidential election. Trump versus Harris, the mega rich versus the mega lady, and we are going to go straight into it. Lots happened this week, as per usual, and to be honest, part of me will almost be happy when this is all done. It's been more than easy to find coverage of things. I'm getting a little tired of talking about these two, but in full honesty, it's easy because something's happening all the time, and what has to be one of the most crazy elections of my lifetime. It's the craziest election of my lifetime. This week, no difference. Originally, I wanted to cover straight away. The biggest news is that Joe Rogan had on Donald Trump. Whisperings, echoes, whatever, rumors was that it was going to happen, and then it did. And it came out, I believe, Friday night around 11 o'clock. I watched it right away, and I was going to do an instant podcast reaction. It was wildly uneventful. Trump talked a lot. He bragged about how he weaves. He's super impressed with the fact that he can talk about something, get off track, and come back on. He thinks it's a superpower. Besides that, he came off as more normal than you'd think Donald Trump would come off. It's also been confirmed that Kamala Harris will not be doing the Joe Rogan podcast unless some sort of circumstances change. And as I'm recording this, the Joe Rogan podcast with J.D. Vance could be coming out at any point. It could be out as we speak. I'm not sure. But it was huge. I think they said it was Trump's third biggest podcast, but it's only been a week, not even, a few days, and it's just had millions and millions of views. I think Bob Lazar and like one other was bigger than that. So it got out there. It got a lot of ears, and the mail vote, which drives heavily in favor of Trump. So it definitely didn't hurt Trump, whereas Kamala refused to go on. It sounded like there were talks of her going on, but she wanted Rogan to travel to her and only do an hour, and she's not the get. Rogan's the get. Like, he doesn't need Kamala Harris. She's clawing for every inch to try to get the presidency. She's the one that is, I won't say desperate, but she's the one with a demand. Rogan's got the supply. It's not the other way around. Rogan can put on anyone he wants, and he's doing just fine. He's got his ranch or compound. Who knows? Joe Rogan might have a secret lair somewhere in some ranch down in Austin, Texas. We don't know. Right? But she did not go on. Turns out J.D. Vance is taking him up on it, and I look forward to finding out about that. But that's just where the news begins. As I said, that was tame. Trump gets done with that, and he goes back on the campaign rally, and man, oh man, Donald Trump did the most racist, unbelievable, fascist thing anyone could ever consider doing. A week before the election, he went to Madison Square Garden. As you all know, if you've studied history, it's the most racist place on earth. It is the bedrock. I mean, of Nazi stuff. You have like the Eagle's Nest up in Austria where Hitler vacationed. You've got, I don't know, wherever Himmler, had his little occult stuff, or Goebbels or whoever. I don't know. I'm no expert. And then you have Madison Square Garden. If you don't know what I'm talking about, because rightfully you shouldn't, Donald Trump held a rally at Madison Square Garden, which one might think is a bit strange. New York is not a swing state. Usually most of the time spent this late in the campaign will be in swing states. They go to Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, ad nauseum, right? Get down to Arizona. I think he did Arizona like a couple hours after Rogan. Why New York? Trump knows that if you sell out Madison Square Garden, it's going to get a lot of views. It's a digital age, right? We have the internet. People are going to see it. And so that's what he does. His problem, though, is that MSNBC, Tim Walz, Hillary Clinton, they all saw right through him. No one, and I mean no one, goes to Madison Square Garden to hold a political event unless they're a fascist. If you don't believe me, just give this guy a listen on MSNBC. I believe this guy's name is Jonathan Capehart of MSNBC to discuss this heinous, racist act of using Madison Square Garden as a venue. It's unheard of.
At Madison Square Garden comes days after his own former chief of staff went on record to describe his former boss as a fascist. But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally, a rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. When a Jewish protester rushed the stage, the Associated Press reported, quote, instantly, a dozen or more stormtroopers set upon him, knocking him down and beating him as he held his head in his arms. Most of his clothing was torn from his body. Later, he was booked for disorderly conduct. Now, against that backdrop of history, Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within, who has threatened to use the troops to quell what he says are lawless cities, and to use those troops to carry out mass deportations of immigrants, is once again turning Madison Square Garden into a staging ground for extremism.
Oh my God. You heard it here first. It happened as recently as 1939. The parallels are uncanny. There was a rally in 1939, and a little less than 100 years later, Trump had a rally. As Tim Walz said, he's like, the parallels are obvious. He didn't go on to elucidate us on any of the parallels other than Trump is a Nazi, right? He loves his generals, and they try to go on and on about, I don't know, Trump being Hitler. And then they had a rally at Madison Square Garden. There you go. It's open and shut case. Who would do that? Who would have a rally at Madison Square Garden and not expect to have these comparisons drawn? Because the Nazism's clear. Were there a lot of Israel flags there? Were there a lot of conservative Jewish people there? Yes, all that's true. They're Nazis. They're Nazis. The Israeli flag, okay, maybe that's not the best example. There's a little, but the Israeli flag obviously is a Nazi sentiment. Okay. No one else besides Trump would have a rally at Madison Square Garden. I mean, Franklin Delano Roosevelt did, but that was before Hitler. But once, and Hitler didn't have it. It was an American thing that Hitler didn't even associate with because he didn't want to step on the American government's toes. Like, they loved Hitler. Hitler just kind of was like, that's nice, but I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to drag the Americans in, right? But after these Nazis, not Hitler, but after the American Nazis had a rally at Madison Square Garden, no one else would. FDR did, but now it's tainted. No one would ever be there again. I mean, JFK was there. Sure, he held a rally there. That's an exception. JFK, great president. He's from the Northeast. He's from Massachusetts. That's the one except. Richard Nixon also rallied there. Those are the only two examples I could think of besides Walter Mondale, Bill Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump in 2016, Pope John Paul II, Pope Francis, 3 Democratic National Conventions, and the 2004 RNC. Those are it. That's the only examples, okay? You take all those away, and I'll give you. Look, if you want to make a compelling case for the 2004 RNC, like we're fresh into a war we just lied in with Iraq, okay, MSNBC, make a parallel there. I'll shut up. But yeah, there was no one Besides those examples, besides all of those presidential candidates, those 2 popes, those 4 national conventions, nowhere else would use a political rally except a fascist at Madison Square Garden. The place is barely known. But, of course it's racist because Trump is Hitler, especially if you ask MSNBC, Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, any left-wing nut. And this wasn't without its own drama. If we can all get past the fact that we probably realize that regardless of if you like Trump or not, he's probably not Adolf Hitler. I think there's a really good chance. I think we could probably safely say to any reasonable person that Trump isn't Adolf Hitler. So let's be a little bit arrogant and just assume that, okay? He has some people on to speak. Dr. Phil, also probably a Nazi, right? Hulk Hogan. But to open was Tony Hinchcliffe, roast master, friend of Joe Rogan, comedian. He's famous for his roast. He did the roast of Tom Brady. He's done a lot of different roasts. And a lot of heat gets there. He makes a lot of jokes about race and ethnicities. And the biggest one was he made a joke saying that there was a serious concern in the ocean. My delivery's not going to be the same. He was pretty funny about it. There's a giant floating island of garbage in the ocean. That's a really big concern. And he said, I believe it's called Puerto Rico. His jokes didn't all land there. To be fair, it wasn't maybe the best venue for these jokes. But he said them, and there's a lot of backlash. The news goes nuts, and they're instantly counting. They're like, there's 500,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania. There's this many thousand in Michigan. They're just licking their chops. Like, how much is this going to sink him under? Now, Trump didn't say it. I think his people even walked it back a little bit. But it was at his rally. He has to shut up and take his medicine on it, whether it is or isn't. They backed off, said, hey, we don't endorse that. It was a joke. Other people are like, this is clearly, he's got a comedian saying it because they're at a Nazi rally. It's supposed to be the Republicans, but we all know it's the German National Socialist Workers' Party. And Tony Hinchcliffe is his, one of those generals, right? So for a day or so, there is a considerable amount of heat and traction on this off-color joke about Puerto Ricans. Or not even Puerto Ricans, but the island itself. I guess that's probably an important distinction to make. That goes on, and Joe Biden has something to say about it. Let's give it a listen.
Donald Trump has no character. He doesn't give a damn about the Latino community. He's failed businessman. He only cares about the billionaire friends he has and accumulating wealth for those at the top. He says immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. Give me a break. He wants to do away with the birthright citizenship. Who the hell has said that in the last 100 years? And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters, his demonization of Latinos.
He doesn't know the Puerto Rican that he knows, but the only garbage he knows is his supporters. So, as politics plays out, they say, okay, we'll take one Tony Hinchcliffe soundbite and we'll raise you a tone-deaf Joe Biden soundbite where he calls all of Trump's supporters garbage. And so now, after the left was like, oh my goodness, he's attacking this poor island of Puerto Rico, now the Republicans, they get a gasp and put their hands on their chest and say, did you just call us garbage? And then now they're saying, unbelievable, so much hate on either side. And around it goes. Now, I did see an article earlier where Kamala basically pleads her case that this is an election of freedom versus division, which, ironically, in that sentence, she is dividing the nation into one side that divides and one side that's free. The only way that's not a paradox is if it's her side that's divisive. And it is divisive, but I would say Republican side is to an extent, though not nearly as much. But there's just this victimization game that I'm sick of. Yes, we get it. And I'm so tired of the Nazi. It's the weakest thing. He's a Russian sympathizer. He's a Nazi. He's a fascist. He's anti-American. He's anti-everything. And at the same time, all they do is divide and are divisive. That's why I'm happy for this election to be drawing near a close. I'm also very apprehensive of the results and what will be taking place, but it's just getting exhausting between the media propping up Kamala and Kamala just failing at every corner and turn and bend to, one, be charismatic in the slightest, and two, to be able to promote herself or her policies is just getting old. She is only capable of attacking and critiquing Donald Trump. And we need that. Trump needs to be reined in, but it's not particularly good. There's a million things you can critique Trump on. He's not an expert at anything. He has bad economic policies. He's had foreign mistakes. But what do? Oh, he's a Nazi. There's a 70 years ago, they had a Nazi tournament, Nazi rally, and he's got one in the same place. Further proof he's a Nazi. He's Hitler. It's just sad. And then Trump, well, generally more entertaining. He loves a gimmick, man. The internet went nuts for him serving fries, which I thought was obvious. I didn't think it was that clever. Everyone acted like it was some masterful genius stroke for a billionaire to serve fries. I didn't get it. If it works, it works. That's maybe what Trump's best at is figuring out. It's like a Michael Bay film, right? Is that the guy that blows everything up and the Transformers is like, it lacks substance, but it grabs your attention and people, the general population seems to like it. The French fry thing was like some big success. And then most recently, after the comments about Biden referring to half the voting bloc as garbage, Trump tonight showed up to an interview in a garbage truck that had his symbol and Make America Great Again all over it. And it's a shtick. Like, it'll grab attention and people will love it and say it's the smartest thing ever. I don't know. It's very gimmicky. I'm over it. I will be happy that this stuff will be coming to a close shortly. Which brings me to my next piece for the night is what the heck is going to happen on Tuesday. I have been watching and reading and looking at polls and polling data and polling analysis nonstop. Oh, not nonstop, but to a very good degree. And we all know it comes down to the 7 swing states, right? Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Forgive me if I missed one, but I'm not going to read off a list. It seems like North Carolina and Arizona should be going to Trump. Trump's up in a lot of polls, Trump's down in a lot of polls, and then they tell you polling data doesn't mean anything, and then early votes start to come in, and they say early voting doesn't mean anything. And I put into my algorithm a way to, I started looking at right-wing stuff, then I started looking at left-wing stuff, and every side is making it their own darn narrative, which leaves me not really knowing. What we do know is most of the polling data shows that it's close. The right says, look at 2016, look at 2020. Trump was under, the polling data underestimated him terribly, and it did. And so therefore, if it's close, and now honestly it's leaning towards him, that is the best news Trump could have, other than he's up 80 points or whatever, obviously. But that's not going to happen. But in a tight election, for him to be dead even or maybe have the inch, that looks good for Trump. This thing's a wrap. That's what the right's saying. And then you look at the betting odds. There's all these places where you can put bets, and a lot of people say this is more accurate because what is motivating these predictions is money, not politics, right? There's less biasy. You're trying to make money. You're not trying to be biased. And the polling data looks amazing for Trump. He's got a 66% chance basically to win. And I think he's actually favored to win the popular vote, which hasn't happened since, I believe, 2004 for the Republicans. They just generally, if they become president, they just generally don't make the popular vote. They win on the Electoral College. Now, if you listen to the left, they go, hey, this polling data, everyone's so scared to screw this one up again because polling data has been off. They're doing something they call pollster herding, which basically everyone says it's super close. They all get to a consensus that no one can tell the difference, and then they're basically mitigating their losses, right? If we're wrong about Trump or we're wrong about Kamala, if we bet it right down the middle, we're off by it as little as possible. Either way, we're cutting the difference. We're splitting the difference. So they say, hey, this is what all these polling data are doing, but now it's tipping towards Trump because there's all these really biased right-wing pollsters. And I don't know. I know that in the past, and if you ask the right now, the polling data skews heavily Democrat. When you listen to the liberals, they say there's certain polls that are so Republican it's unreal, and that's given him the tilt, and everyone else is too scared to make a real poll, and so it's saying Trump's going to win. They don't talk about the betting as much, other than they said, oh, there's a couple of wells out there that are just dumping in millions, right, to adjust it. They're rigging it. They're having a huge influence just off the millions they're making, and maybe it is. Maybe Elon Musk is just dumping money in there or something. He doesn't seem to me to be a gambler. That's probably not true. Elon Musk probably, maybe it's Dana White. Who knows? But a couple of wells are adjusting it. They also say that the polling data, early voting data, in Pennsylvania in particular, is showing a lot more women. And we do know that women are polling way heavier for Kamala, likely because of Roe v. Wade, and men are polling way heavier for Trump, likely because of, I don't know, common sense. Again, I'm not voting for Trump, but man, am I rooting for him. That's my bias. There it is on the table. So, you can look at these polls three ways. They're hurting them, and so it's actually Trump's at a severe disadvantage. We just don't, or he's losing, but we don't know it because of right-wing pollster bias and the hurting from the others. You can look at it from the Republican side, which is, the left also says that 2022, in the midterms, the pollsters way overrepresented the Republicans, and they did. You ask the Republican side, the right-wing side, the Trump-supporting side, they say midterms and general elections for the president, those things are just completely different. Apples and oranges. You can't compare the two. I don't know. Right? The other option is that the polls are spot on and is very close. And if that's the case, then we don't know. This is a long, roundabout way of saying I've examined the main three sides, right? And it's either Trump wins, Kamala wins, or we don't know. And so we don't really have any definitive thing. And the more I looked at this and the more I read it, I just go, these polls are, if they can't be trusted, they're damn near worthless. And look, neither side trusts the polls. And so an outsider like me certainly doesn't. So I'm kind of wondering the point. And so when Tuesday comes around, what are we to think? Anecdotally, I feel like Trump should win. It feels like a referendum on the Democrats, much the way Trump lost in 2020 as a referendum on Trump. They were tired of him, right? Now, he had the entire media apparatus going after him. COVID had happened. There's a lot of different variables. He had his faults, clearly, but it was a referendum on Trump. It wasn't that everyone was thrilled with sleepy Joe Biden. This seems like it would be, naturally to me, a referendum on the Democrats. We've suffered inflation. The COVID regime was worse under him. Foreign policy is a disaster. Israel's at war with Iran. For all intents and purposes, they might not have declared it, but we haven't declared a war since Hungary in the 1940s. Do you think we've been at war since then? Russia's at war with Ukraine. They're saying North Korea's in. There's tensions all over. Foreign policy is a disaster. The monetary and fiscal policy sucks. The immigration has been out of control. There's Venezuelans occupying apartments. This should be a referendum on the Democrats, regardless. She's not the president. She's the vice president. And when asked, what would you have done differently? She said, more or less, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not lying when she said, nothing comes to mind that she would do differently. She can't platform, or she's too indecisive to platform for herself. So she said, hey, no, Biden, he's been killing it. You wouldn't believe it. Does all this shit in his sleep, and he's just on all the time. Also, Trump, while seemingly doing terrible with women because of Roe v. Wade, that is by far his biggest concern, is suburban white women, it seems, that he'll lose a larger margin of them because of Roe v. Wade. He is closing, like no Republican's done in my lifetime, on minority votes, whether it's African American, whether it's Latino, or Latinx, as they like to say. He seems to be closing in on that. And not only in polls, I don't like to use anecdotal evidence. I have, in my life, a lot of anecdotal evidence of urban minorities that are supporting Trump. I'm not saying it's a majority, but it is a surprising amount to me. Now, I'm not in a swing state, and I can't say that carries over from one metropolitan area to the other, but anecdotally, I've seen that to a degree that very much surprises me. So again, who's going to vote? Are the minorities going to go out and vote? Are the suburban white women going to come out in the droves? Is all this likely voter stuff is going to determine it. Who's coming out and voting? That's going to be the main thing. We don't know. Instinctually, if I thought everything was on the up and up, I think I'd feel marginally good on a Trump victory. I don't believe I'd put money on it. But if someone asked me for a Trump prediction, that's what I would give. However, I don't really have faith in the system. We already saw today, not long before I started this podcast, there's apparently a found out about known issue nationwide on Dominion voting machines. Apparently, it's something to do with straight down the line party voting. Who knows? I'm sure it'll confuse the American populace. Most of them shouldn't be voting anyways. I'm not convinced that everybody should vote at all. But will that screw it? Will that screw up results? Will that result in a way for them to try to rectify it or course correct or meddle? No clue. Not for me to say. Trump has been almost assassinated, shot through the ear, grazed through the ear, and another time there was a sniper setting up at his golf course. Last week, when I talked and asked the main questions I had for what would happen when either Kamala or Trump became president, I forgot my first question. I skimmed over it. My very first question for what happens if Trump wins is, what's the over-under on assassination attempts? He's been completely hated by the state, by the deep state since day one. He's been called a Russian agent. Now, Russia's waging a war against what they say is a country that they're trying to denazify. So as he's a Russian agent, he's also Adolf Hitler and a Nazi and a Madison Square Garden Nazi. He's been called all of those things. They're not fans. Assassination attempts, felonies, 91 counts against him, salacious lies, the fake Steele dossier. They've thrown every single thing at him. I do believe this is a close election. Now, there's nothing I can confirm that that the assassinations have anything to do with people who hate him in the deep state. I can't do that. Now, if we look at the media and we look at government officials, they have openly said, you're a Russian sympathizer, you're a Russian agent, you're Hitler, you're Nazi, etc., etc. All the things I just said before. If they're willing to say all that, if they're willing to throw, was it 91 counts on him? 34 counts. I don't know where I got that. 34 counts, and they made him a felon, and they've called him a Russian agent, and they've called him a Nazi, yada, yada, yada. And it's a close election, and I do believe it is a close election. It's a highly divided country. They could only BS us. If the polls are wrong or if the polls are misleading intentionally, they can only get away with it so much, right? If there's some sort of presidential election where only 5% of the people were in favor of someone, you couldn't make it seem like it was 50-50. Now, that's an extreme example, but we can tell it's a close election. Biden and Trump were close. Kamala and Trump will be close. How? Knowing what we know, how the state and the media and the apparatus at large, the cathedral, Michael Malice would say, knowing how they feel about Donald Trump, how can you predict that he's going to win the election if it's that close? Not one hand pushed on the scale is what we're assuming. Earlier on X, there was already a report that one voter ID in Detroit, Michigan was found to have voted 29 times. Now, did that person go in to 29 different places? There were several times the address was the same. Like out of the 20, it was like 3 at this address, 4 at this address, 5 at this address slotted. Or was it some sort of machine error where they punched it in, it went pop, 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 29 votes when the guy just tried to do it once on the up and up? We don't know. We're not sure. Maybe the voting system just screwed up and he didn't vote, or it's putting the wrong voter ID on 29 separate votes, which wouldn't probably make sense because there was a ton of them were at the recurring addresses. There's already enough stuff to just go, who knows? I don't have faith in the institution of democracy. I don't have faith in the democratic process. And I mean that mostly in terms of results and morality. It's not for me. However, if you ask me, do I think the U.S. does a good job at election integrity, which is pretty pivotal for the democratic process? It's very, very pivotal, right? We have 50 different states using different machines or paper ballots. Some candidates are on the board here, some aren't there. Sometimes you have to get an inordinate amount of signatures just to even appear on the ballot here. And then some states, you just don't have to show your ID. In fact, it would be illegal for you to ask for the person's ID. What, for a man like myself who has no faith in government, how do you expect me to have faith in their handling and operation of that? So for all those reasons, I'm going to give you guys a prediction. It's going to be a close, contentious election. People will be up, nail biting, and I predict a Kamala Harris win. Now, we can argue, we can debate, we can question, we can raise an eyebrow, we can scratch our beard, and we can say, how do we feel about that? Is it a good win? Did the refs botch the job? Was it a fix? Was it straight up? Were the polls right? Were the polls wrong? Regardless of who wins, everyone's going to be asking that stuff. But my prediction is to use not the polling data, other than the fact that we think it's close. And so I'm just going to use my general beliefs in the state, in powers, in the elite. And that's not a real optimistic, positive view on that. I believe they control and influence whatever it is they think they can. These people have overthrown nations all around the world. The Tuskegee experiment, false flag attacks, lying about the Gulf of Tonkin Bay, funding the Taliban, forming Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of this. And I'm to believe that they would never, ever put their hand on the scale, nudge something in one direction or the other. I'm sorry. I don't believe it. If they think they can get away with it, especially if they know they can get away with it, they will. And then all you have to ask yourself is, Which way do they tilt the scale? Which way do they nudge it? And my guess would be not towards the guy that they've called a Nazi, fascist, sexual assaulter, agent Russian, Putin, puppet, monster. We'll check in with you guys next week, perhaps sooner if something crazy happens. But we'll check in after the election, and we'll find out. We might not know. If I put one out next Wednesday, we might not know if it is or is not settled yet. The election process is slow. I think Maricopa County in Arizona, one of the most important counties, already said it's going to take weeks. You can fact check me on that. One of the main counties said that. I believe it was Maricopa. They already said, hey, just to give you guys a heads up, it's going to be a mess. We've seen ballot boxes burning in Oregon and Washington, which are deep blue. There's no chance they're going to flip. But does that inspire someone from elsewhere around the world in one of these critical counties for them to try to tamper with the election? It wouldn't surprise me, right? Are we going to see some sort of black swan event election? If we were to see one, it would still be rare. Obviously, it's a black swan event. I would say this would be the most highly predictable one. If you were ever going to bet on a black swan event election, this would be the one. Okay. Ruminate on that. Pay attention to the election. We'll come back and talk. Please, if you like this if you liked this podcast, like and subscribe, share it, whatever you're sharing it on. Give it 5 stars. Go to YouTube, subscribe, tell your friends. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.